You know those Bible stories that make you want to cringe? There are many of them, especially in the Old Testament. You know what I'm talking about, right? Genocide, rape, incest, plus the passages that are just hard to read, even if you know that it was progressive for the time in which they were written. Often, it can help to recognize the difference between something that's descriptive, just describing what happened, and something that's prescriptive, prescribing what ought to happen. But that doesn't always help. Like the story of God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. It's in Genesis 22. You can read it there, but proceed with caution. In fact, you may even want to proceed with caution on this video, because here's the ugliest part of that horror text. Isaac, 13 years old, tied up by his father, sitting on top of a pile of wood with his father about to raise the knife. Now, I promise you that we're not going to whitewash this story and come up with a simple explanation. It's terrifying. The story is terrifying. We'll come back to that horror image in a few minutes, but let's look more closely at the whole story. Abram and his wife Sarai were way past childbearing age when God promised them a son. If you ever want to know how dangerous it can be to come up with our own ideas for how to help God out and take things into our own hands, just read the whole story. It's 4,000 years later, and we're still dealing with conflicts that come out of that story. In fact, a lot of those conflicts would be helped significantly if we just read the story more closely. But at the ages of 90 and 100, Sarah and Abraham had their own son. His name was Isaac. And about 13 years ago, God asked him to take his son, who he loved so very much, to Mount Moriah, where he would sacrifice him. Now, coincidentally, Mount Moriah is the place where the temple was built. It's where the Dome of the Rock sits today, and all of Abraham's descendants are still arguing over that very plot of land in Jerusalem. So back up and park right there. God asked Abram to do what? What kind of a God does that? Now, maybe it helps if you know that that was commonplace for the religions of the day, child sacrifice, and you could make an argument that it's still common. And it certainly helps to know that God intervened in the story, and God did not ask Abraham to go through with the act. In fact, he was revealing that he's not like the other gods all around. Abraham showed that he was willing to trust God even when it made absolutely no sense. And especially in the scope of the whole of the Bible, that's a really helpful lesson to learn. It really isn't obedience if we only do what makes sense to us anyway. That's a helpful part of this story. And from Abraham's perspective, it can also help to reflect on the fact that Abraham actually became a better parent as a result of this story. Now, stay with me here for a moment. Of course, Abraham loved Isaac on the way up the mountain as well as on the way down. But I think the love was healthier on the way down. It was based in gratitude instead of the temptation to live vicariously through his son, to protect him like everything depended on it. In fact, it's one of the very worst things that we can do as parents, to derive all of our meaning and purpose, identity from our children. We end up smothering them with an unhealthy love. And I believe that changed. I believe it was healthier after this incident than it was before. Well, all of that's great for Abraham, but what about Isaac? The image seared in his mind of asking his father, where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham says, well, God will provide. And God did provide. But then he ties his son up and puts him on the pile of wood ready for the fire and raises his hand with the knife. I read it again yesterday, and it almost gave me like a PTSD type reaction, just imagining what that would be like for Isaac for the rest of his life. And I'm not a victim of physical child abuse. Talk about a text of horror. But here is the critical question. Is the horror that we feel when we read this, is it based on our own experiences, firsthand or secondhand, of the evil and the terror and the horror of our broken world and violent child abuse and all of the tragic ways that we mess up the world around us? Is our horror based in that? Those are such terribly real realities, and we cannot ignore them, and we cannot just pass over them. Or are we horrified by the cost of our sin? The cost is so high that in fact it meant that the Heavenly Father had to go all the way through with the sacrifice, with an adult son who volunteered for the job in an even more horrifying situation. Are we horrified by the cost of our own fallen brokenness, which requires the cross? My sin, all of it, caused this chasm of separation that could only be bridged by the cross. Let me ask it again. Is the horror of this story caused by the reality of our brokenness or the reality of God's extravagant love? I hope the answer can be yes.